The alarm screamed through every corridor of the colony ship New Providence. Captain Sarah Chen gripped her command chair as the vessel shook violently. Red emergency lights painted everything in blood colors. "Engine core is collapsing," her chief engineer shouted over the noise. "We have maybe 20 minutes before complete failure." Sarah looked at the main screen. A dying star filled half the view, its surface boiling with violent energy. They had jumped too close, trying to save time. Now that mistake would kill all 12,000 colonists sleeping in the cryobays below. "Send distress signals on all frequencies," Sarah ordered. Her voice stayed calm, even though her heart hammered in her chest. "Keep sending, until the power dies." The communications officer worked frantically at her station. "Captain, we're too far from human space. No one will reach us in time." Sarah knew this was true. Humanity had only achieved faster than light travel 15 years ago. They were the newest species in the galactic congregation, barely noticed by the older civilizations. Their territory was small, their ships were few. Help would not come. The New Providence shuddered again. Somewhere deep in the ship, something exploded. The lights flickered. "Captain!" The communications officer's voice rose with sudden hope. "We're receiving a response. Someone is coming." "Who?" Sarah leaned forward. "The signal identifies them as Velari. 3 ships. They say they're 12 minutes away." Sarah had heard of the Velari. They were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, reptilian scholars and merchants who had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. But their territory was on the other side of this sector. What were they doing here? "Tell them we have 12,000 people aboard," Sarah said. "Tell them we need immediate evacuation." The minutes crawled by like hours. The New Providence groaned and twisted as its failing engines tore themselves apart. More alarms joined the chorus. The artificial gravity began to fail, making everyone grab onto their stations. Then 3 ships appeared on the screen. They were beautiful vessels, sleek and silver, covered in patterns that looked like scales. The Velari ships moved with practiced grace, positioning themselves around the dying colony ship. "They're extending docking tubes," the officer reported. "Multiple connections. They're opening their cargo bays." Sarah activated the ship-wide channel. "All hands. Begin emergency evacuation. Wake the cryo-sleepers. Everyone to the docking ports. Move quickly, but don't panic." The next 15 minutes became a blur of organized chaos. 12,000 humans poured through the docking tubes into the Velari ships. The aliens worked alongside them, their scaled hands helping lift children, supporting the elderly, carrying the injured. Sarah stayed on the bridge until the end, making sure every human was accounted for. Her first officer had to physically pull her away as the engine core entered its final failure sequence. They made it through the docking tube with seconds to spare. Sarah watched through a porthole as the New Providence tore itself apart in a flash of light and debris. The ship that carried humanity's hope for a new world was gone. A Velari approached her in the corridor. He stood over 7 feet tall, with golden scales and intelligent amber eyes. He wore robes marked with symbols Sarah didn't recognize. "I am Elder Takar," he said in perfect English. "You are safe now." Sarah's legs suddenly felt weak. The fear and adrenaline drained away, leaving her exhausted. "You saved us. All of us. How did you get here so fast?" We were conducting research on stellar collapse in this region," Takar explained. "We detected your distress signal and came immediately. It was fortunate timing." "Fortunate?" Sarah shook her head. "You risked 3 ships and your entire crew to save strangers. The radiation levels near that star, the debris field, the danger. Why would you do that?" Takar tilted his head, a gesture that might have been confusion. "Because you needed help. Is this not reason enough?" Over the next few hours, Sarah learned the cost of their rescue. 23 Velari crew members had died bringing the humans to safety. Two of the three ships had suffered severe damage. The Velari had known the risks and come anyway. Sarah found Takar again in one of the observation decks. The old Velari stood looking out at the stars, his posture suggesting deep thought. "Elder Takar," Sarah said quietly, "humanity owes you a debt we can never repay. 23 of your people gave their lives for us." Takar turned to face her. His amber eyes were kind, but also sad. "You owe us nothing, Captain. We did what any civilized species would do. As for my crew members who died, they made their own choice. They knew the danger and went anyway. That is worthy of honor. Still," Sarah insisted, "we will repay this debt. I don't know how or when, but humanity will find a way." The elder made a sound that might have been a gentle laugh. "Young Captain, your species is barely 50 years among the stars. You are enthusiastic and brave, but also very young. Young species make many promises in moments of emotion. We expect nothing from you, except that you live well and remember this day with kindness." Sarah stood straighter. "We will remember, Elder. Humanity will remember, and we will repay." "Of not," Takar nodded. But Sarah could see he didn't believe her. He had probably heard similar promises from other species before. The galaxy was old, and the Velari had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. To him, humans were just another young species, making dramatic statements they would forget in a few years. But as Sarah looked out at the stars, she made a private vow. Humanity would not forget. No matter how long it took, no matter what the cost, this debt would be repaid. She didn't know then that it would take 257 years. She didn't know that her own descendant would be the one to fulfill her promise. She only knew that the Velari had shown humanity what true civilization looked like, and that lesson would never be forgotten. The three Velari ships changed course, carrying 12,000 human refugees toward safety. Behind them, the dying star continued its collapse, painting the void with violent light. The debt was recorded, the clock was set, and humanity's reputation for keeping promises, no matter the cost, began on that day among the stars. Ambassador Liu Wei walked through the corridors of the Velari embassy station. He carried a small data pad in his hands, just as every human ambassador before him had done. The pad contained one message, the same message that had been delivered for over 2 centuries. It was the year 3019. 172 years had passed since the rescue of the New Providence. Liu Wei was the 34th human ambassador to deliver the message. He found Elder Sevral in the meditation garden, a space filled with plants from a dozen worlds. The Velari looked up as Liu approached, his silver scales catching the artificial sunlight. "Ambassador Liu," Sevral greeted him warmly. "Always a pleasure. Have you come for our weekly discussion of trade agreements?" "Actually, Elder, I've come to deliver our message." Liu held up the datapad. Sevral's face showed something that might have been gentle amusement. "Ah, yes. The message. You humans and your tradition. Very well. I will hear it." Liu read from the pad, though he had memorized the words long ago. "We remember the debt incurred on the 14th day of March, 2847. We remember the sacrifice of 23 Velari lives to save 12,000 human lives. Humanity will repay this debt. This is our solemn promise." "Received and acknowledged," Sevral said formally. Then his tone softened. "Ambassador, surely you understand that we require no payment? Your species has delivered this message every month for nearly 200 years. The debt, if it ever existed, is long forgotten." "Not by humanity," Liu replied. "We have not forgotten." After leaving the embassy, Liu returned to the human diplomatic quarters. He entered a secure room where a single computer terminal glowed in the dimness. This terminal was never connected to any network. It existed in isolation, protected and maintained by a small team of specialists. Liu logged in and added his report to the file. The file was designated VP 2847, named for the Velari Promise and the year it was made. It contained everything humanity knew about the Velari civilization: population numbers, fleet strength, trade routes, political structures, resource distribution, potential threats. The file had been growing for 172 years. Every human ambassador contributed to it. Every human intelligence officer working in Velari space added their findings. Every trader, every scientist, every tourist who visited Velari worlds was debriefed and their observations recorded, because humanity was waiting for the moment when they could repay what they owed. Liu opened the historical section of the file. It told a sad story. In the 2 centuries since the rescue, the Velari civilization had been slowly declining. Their birth rates were dropping. Their population was aging. Diseases that once were rare now spread more frequently among them. Their empire, which once spanned 40 star systems, had contracted to just 12. Other species in the galaxy noticed the decline. Some saw opportunity. The Velari had been wealthy once, and their remaining worlds contained resources worth taking. But the Velari were also ancient and respected. No one wanted to be the species that destroyed such an old civilization. So the galaxy watched and waited, like vultures circling a dying animal. Only humanity seemed to care about the Velari surviving, rather than just profiting from their fall. Across human space, the Velari vigil continued. It had started as an informal tradition, but had grown into something more. In every human government, in every major corporation, in schools and universities, someone always monitored the Velari situation. They tracked every change, every threat, every opportunity to help. Some humans thought it was obsessive. They argued that the debt was ancient history, that humanity had more important concerns. But these voices were always shouted down by the majority. The promise had been made. The promise would be kept. Children in human schools learned about Captain Sarah Chen and Elder Takar. They learned about the sacrifice of 23 Velari crew members. They learned that keeping promises was what separated civilization from barbarism. The story became part of human identity. On the anniversary of the rescue every year, humans everywhere observed a moment of silence. They called it Debt Day. During that moment, every human was supposed to think about what they owed to others and what others owed to them. It was about remembering that debts mattered. The Velari found this tradition puzzling and touching. Other galactic species found it amusing. Some called humans obsessive. Others called them naive. A few called them dangerous, because a species that never forgot grudges might also never forget alliances. But mostly, the galaxy just laughed at humanity's strange fixation with an ancient debt that no one expected would ever be repaid. In the year 3067, Elder Takar died. He was ancient by Velari standards, over 400 years old. His death was mourned across the Velari worlds. Humans held their own memorial services in his honor. They sent messages of condolence and support. Takar had lived long enough to see the message delivered 184 times. In his final years, he had spoken fondly of the humans and their stubborn promise. He told interviewers that while he didn't believe the debt would ever be repaid in any concrete way, the gesture itself was beautiful. The fact that humans kept trying mattered more than any actual repayment. His last words, recorded by his students, were about humanity. "They are young and strange," he had whispered, "but they have good hearts. I hope they survive the cruelty of this galaxy. I hope they teach others what they have taught me about keeping faith." When Lu Wei delivered the message after Takar's death, he found himself speaking to Kellan, one of Takar's last students. Kellan was young by Velari standards, barely 90 years old. He listened to the message with the same patient courtesy his teacher had shown. "Did you ever meet Elder Takar?" Kellan asked after Liu finished. "No. Liu admitted. He died before I took this posting. But I studied his writings. He was wise. He often spoke of your Captain Chen, Kellan said. He said she had the fire of a true believer. He respected that, even though he thought she made an impossible promise. It wasn't impossible, Liu said quietly. It was just patient. By the year 3104, the Velari civilization had shrunk to only 4 worlds. Their homeworld of Velar, Prime, and 3 small colonies. Their population had fallen to 8 billion, down from over 60 billion at their height. Their merchant fleets, once the largest in the galaxy, consisted of barely 200 ships. Their military was almost non-existent. The galaxy had mostly written them off. The Velari were ancient history, a cautionary tale about civilizations that couldn't adapt. Soon they would fade away entirely, and the younger species would divide up their resources and forget they ever existed. But in the secure rooms of human intelligence agencies, in the quiet offices of human diplomats, in the minds of human strategists, the Velari were still the most important species in the galaxy, because humanity was still waiting, still watching, still preparing. The debt was 257 years old, and humanity's patience was about to be rewarded with the opportunity to finally repay what they owed. Though when that opportunity came, it would cost humanity more than anyone could have imagined. The emergency session of the Galactic Congregation was chaos. Representatives from 47 species shouted at each other in a dozen languages. Translation systems struggled to keep up with the overlapping voices. Fear hung in the chamber, like smoke. Ambassador Liu Wei sat in the human delegation section and watched the panic spread. On the massive display screens around the chamber, images showed the same terrifying sight. Planets stripped bare of all life, cities reduced to empty shells, entire star systems turned into graveyards. The VX swarm had arrived. They had come from beyond the galactic rim, from the dark space between galaxies. No one knew what they wanted, or if they even thought in ways other species could understand. They simply consumed everything in their path: organic matter, metals, water, atmosphere, everything. They left behind dead rocks, floating in empty space. They've destroyed 6 systems in 40 days, the Kralthian ambassador was saying, his forearms gesturing frantically. Nothing stops them. The Hektar threw their entire defense fleet at them, and were annihilated in 3 hours. Enda, we must evacuate the rim worlds, someone else shouted. Pull back our populations to the galactic core where we can defend them, and abandon billions to die? Another voice challenged. What kind of civilization does that? A civilization that wants to survive. Liu Wei studied the tactical displays. The swarm was moving through a relatively narrow corridor of space, consuming worlds as it went. Its path was becoming clear. The projections showed where it would strike next. His blood ran cold when he saw it. Velar Prime. The Velari homeworld lay directly in the swarm's path. They would reach it in approximately 30 days. Liu activated his communicator. Get me a secure line to Earth. Priority Alpha. Now. While he waited for the connection, Liu pulled up the current Velari defense assessment. It was worse than he feared. The Velari had exactly 17 military ships protecting their homeworld. 17 ships against a force that had destroyed entire fleets. The Velari population on their homeworld was 6 billion souls. Their colonies held another 2 billion. But the colonies were scattered and would take months to evacuate. The homeworld was too large to evacuate in 30 days. Most of its population would have no way to escape. Sir, we have Earth. Liu's heart skipped. Admiral Marcus Chen was the fleet commander of Earth's defense forces. He was also the great-great-great-grandson of Captain Sarah Chen. Admiral, Liu said quickly. You've seen the swarm projections? I have. Chen's voice was calm but grave. They're going to hit Velar Prime. Yes, in 30 days. Maybe less if they accelerate. The Velari can't defend themselves. The congregation is debating evacuation protocols. But there isn't time. Most of them will die. There was silence on the line for several seconds. Liu could almost feel Chen thinking through the same calculations he had already done. Then Chen spoke. And Liu heard something in his voice that made his skin prickle. Determination. Purpose. Destiny. Chen spoke. "We says. Ambassador, I need you to open file VP 2847. Authorization code Chen Alpha 7. Liu's hands shook as he entered the codes. The file opened on his personal display. 257 years of carefully collected intelligence. Every detail about the Velari civilization, every contingency plan, every scenario humanity had prepared for. And there, highlighted at the top, was a section labeled Existential Threat Response Protocol. "I'm looking at it," Liu whispered. "We've been preparing for this since 2847, Chen said. "Not this exact scenario, but something like it. The moment when the Velari needed us the way they needed them. The moment when we could repay the debt." Chen said, "Admiral, the cost. I know the cost, Ambassador. I've run the numbers. So did my predecessors. So did every strategic planner in the human fleet for 2.5 centuries. We always knew that repaying this debt might cost us everything." In the congregation chamber, the debate was growing more heated. Species were starting to announce their intentions. The Kralthians were pulling their fleets back to protect their own worlds. The Mixari were closing their borders. The Tolvians were offering humanitarian aid, but no military support. One by one, every species was choosing survival over sacrifice. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Liu asked. "I'm calling up the fleet. All of it. Every ship we have. I'm going to need you to handle the political fallout. Ambassador, when the other species realize what we're doing, they're going to think we've gone insane." "Maybe we have," Liu said, but he was smiling. "How long until you can reach Valar Prime?" 14 days if we push the engines to maximum. We'll arrive 2 weeks before the swarm does." "It's not much time, but it's what we have." Liu closed his eyes. He thought about all the humans who would die in the coming battle. He thought about Earth, left defenseless if the plan failed. He thought about 257 years of preparation leading to this moment. "Do it," he said. "Honor the debt." When the Galactic congregation learned of humanity's plan, the reaction was exactly what Chen had predicted. Shock, disbelief, accusations of insanity. The human delegation was bombarded with questions and criticisms. "You're risking your entire species for a dying civilization," the Kralthian ambassador said. "This is madness. It's honor," Liu replied simply. "Honor. Your homeworld will be defenseless. If the swarm changes course, Earth itself could fall. Then it falls. But we keep our promises." The Velari representative, High Scholar Kellan, sat in stunned silence through the entire debate. When he finally spoke, his voice shook with emotion. "Ambassador Liu, I must speak against this plan. We cannot accept such a sacrifice. The debt you speak of is ancient history. No one expects repayment. Please, do not destroy yourselves for our sake." Liu turned to face Kellan. "High Scholar, do you remember your teacher's last words?" Elder Takar said he hoped humanity would teach others about keeping faith. This is that lesson. We don't break promises. We don't abandon allies. We don't calculate the cost of honor and decide it's too high. "But you will die!" Kellan's voice rose. "Your entire species could be wiped out. We're Kalanicrimes. We're Cloud. We're Cloud. We're Cloud in 40. We're Cloud in 40. We're Cloud. We're Cloud in 40. 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 Then the galaxy will remember that humanity died keeping its word," Liu said. "And maybe, just maybe, That will mean something. Maybe it will inspire others to be better than they are. The debate raged for hours, but it didn't matter. The human fleet was already moving. 230 ships, 60% of humanity's entire military force, were burning toward Valar Prime at maximum speed. Admiral Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable and watched the stars stream past. His crew knew what they were flying toward. They knew the odds. But when Chen had called for volunteers, every single person in the human fleet had stepped forward, not because they wanted to die, but because they understood what it meant to be human. It meant keeping promises, even impossible ones, even deadly ones. The Vaig swarm continued its advance, unaware that for the first time since entering the galaxy, it was about to face an enemy that wouldn't run. An enemy that had spent 2.5 centuries preparing for this exact moment. An enemy that understood that some debts must be paid, no matter the cost. 14 days until contact. 14 days until humanity would show the galaxy what honor truly meant. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel, in perfect formation. 230 warships materialized in the space around Valar Prime like a steel constellation. Admiral Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and looked at the blue-green world below. 6 billion Valari lives. All depending on what happened in the next 2 weeks. Admiral, we're receiving transmissions from the surface, his communications officer reported. High Scholar Kellan is requesting to speak with you. Chen nodded. Put him through. Kellan's scaled face appeared on the main screen. His amber eyes were wide with disbelief. Admiral Chen, you actually came. I thought. I hoped your government would see reason and recall you. We don't abandon our debts, High Scholar, Chen replied. We've been preparing for this moment for 257 years. Every ship in this fleet was built with the possibility of this battle in mind. Every weapon we carry was designed for fighting an enemy, exactly like the swarm. But the cost. Your world is defenseless. Our world stands or falls based on whether civilization matters, Chen said quietly. If we run now, if we let you die to save ourselves, then we're no better than the swarm. We're just another species consuming what we need and ignoring everyone else. Kellan was silent for a long moment. Then he bowed his head. Then we will die together. Admiral, the Valari will fight beside you. No, Chen said firmly. Your job is to evacuate as many of your people as possible. We'll buy you time. Use every ship you have to get civilians off-world. Start with the children. Chen, with Filden. Over the next 14 days, the human fleet transformed the space around Valar Prime into a fortress. They deployed weapons platforms. They scattered mines. They set up sensor nets and communication relays. Every calculation, every strategy, every tactic had been planned and refined over centuries of preparation. The Valari evacuation began immediately. Every transport ship, every cargo hauler, every vessel capable of carrying people was pressed into service. Children went first, then the elderly, then anyone else who could be saved. The Valari worked day and night, desperate to save as many lives as possible. But 6 billion people could not be moved in 2 weeks. Even with the Valari pushing their evacuation to the absolute limit, they would only save about 300 million. 5.7 billion would remain behind, waiting for the swarm to arrive. Chen watched the evacuation, progress reports with a heavy heart. They were going to save some, but not enough. Never enough. Admiral, we have incoming. The tactical officer's voice cut through Chen's thoughts. The Vix swarm has entered sensor range. Time to contact. 14 hours. Sound general quarters, Chen ordered. All ships to battle stations. Prepare to execute Plan Sarah. Plan Sarah. Named after his ancestor, the woman who had made the promise that brought them here. Chen hoped she would be proud of what they were about to do. The swarm appeared as a dark cloud on the sensors. Thousands of bioships. Each one, a living vessel. Grown, rather than built. They moved in perfect coordination, guided by some collective intelligence that humanity still didn't understand. The cloud of ships stretched across millions of kilometers of space. Chen opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. In a few minutes, we're going to face the biggest threat humanity has ever encountered. We're outnumbered. We're probably outgunned. And we're very likely going to die here. He paused, letting that sink in. But we're not here to win. We're here to buy time. Every minute we hold the swarm back is another minute the Velari can evacuate their people. Every hour we fight is another hour that civilization survives. So we're going to stand right here, and we're going to make the swarm pay for every meter of space they take. Another pause. 257 years ago, the Velari risked everything to save 12,000 humans. Today, we risk everything to save billions of them. This is what honor looks like. This is what it means to be human. If we die here, we die knowing we kept our promise. His voice grew stronger, almost fierce. Today, the galaxy will learn what happens when humans make a promise. Today, they'll learn what happens when you save us and earn our eternal gratitude. Today, they'll learn that humanity repays its debts. He raised his fist. All ships, weapons free. For the Velari. For honor. For humanity. The response from every ship came back as a roar. For humanity. The swarm hit the outer defense perimeter like a tidal wave hitting a sandcastle. The automated weapons platforms lasted seconds before being overwhelmed. The minefields took out dozens of bioships, but there were always more to replace them. The human fleet opened fire at maximum range. Missiles streaked through the void. Energy weapons painted lines of light across the darkness. Railgun rounds traveled at relativistic speeds, punching through bioship armor. The swarm's advance slowed, but didn't stop. Focus fire on the larger ships, Chen ordered. Take out anything that looks like a command vessel. But the swarm had no command vessels. It had no weak points. It was a collective organism. Every ship connected to every other ship. Destroying one piece didn't slow the whole. It just made the remaining pieces angrier. The battle evolved into a grinding, desperate slugfest. Human ships moved in coordinated patterns, supporting each other, covering weaknesses, maximizing firepower. They used every trick, every tactic, every strategy that had been developed over 2.5 centuries of preparation. And slowly, incredibly, they began to hurt the swarm. The humans had brought weapons specifically designed for fighting biological enemies. Chemical weapons that disrupted organic processes. Viral packages that infected and destroyed bioship tissue. Thermal weapons that cooked the swarm ships from the inside out. These weapons had been theoretical for centuries, never tested in real combat. Now they proved their worth. Bioships began dying in larger numbers. The swarm's advance actually stopped for the first time since it had entered the galaxy. The dark cloud of ships paused, as if the collective intelligence behind it was surprised that something was effectively fighting back. On Velar Prime, the evacuation continued. Every hour the humans bought meant another million Velari lives saved. Chen watched his fleet slowly get picked apart. Ships exploded in silent flashes. Others tumbled away. Their engines dead. Their crews lost to the void. The casualty reports mounted minute by minute, but they held the line. Days passed in continuous combat. The swarm threw more and more ships at the humans, but couldn't break through. Chen rotated his remaining ships, pulling damaged vessels back and pushing fresh ones forward. He used every ship, every weapon, every resource he had. 2 weeks into the battle, the human fleet had been reduced to 90 ships. Over half their forces were gone, but the swarm had paid terribly for every human life taken. Thousands of bioships drifted dead in space. The dark cloud had been reduced by nearly 40%, and on Valar Prime, the evacuation had saved 5.7 billion lives. Only 300 million Valari remained, unable to escape in time. "Admiral," his executive officer said quietly. "We've done it. The evacuation is complete, except for those who chose to stay behind." Chen nodded slowly. They had succeeded. The debt was repaid. Every Vehlari who could be saved had been saved. Now all that remained was to make sure the swarm couldn't follow them. "All ships," Chen transmitted. "Final phase. Execute Plan Chen." Plan Chen was simple and terrible. It was a suicide run. The remaining 90 ships would charge directly into the heart of the swarm formation and detonate their fusion cores simultaneously. The explosion would be massive enough to cripple what remained of the swarm fleet, stopping their advance for weeks or months, long enough for the galaxy to mobilize a response. As the Indomitable accelerated toward the swarm's center, Chen opened a final channel to High Scholar Kellan. "Scholar, the debt is paid. Get your people to safety. And remember us." Kellan's voice was choked with emotion. "We will never forget, Admiral. Never. The galaxy will know what humanity did here." Chen smiled. Good enough. The 90 human ships drove like spears into the swarm, and in a flash of light that briefly outshone the sun of Valar Prime, they paid the final installment on a debt that was 257 years old. The flash of light from the human fleet's sacrifice was visible across half the sector. Ships from a dozen species watched on their sensors as 90 human warships detonated their cores simultaneously. The explosion tore through what remained of the Vix swarm like a hammer through glass. When the light faded, the swarm's advance had stopped completely. Over 70% of their bioships were destroyed or crippled. The survivors retreated back toward the galactic rim, their collective intelligence apparently deciding this section of space was too costly to consume. High Scholar Kellan stood in the observation deck of a Vaylari transport ship and watched the debris field that had once been humanity's pride. Tears ran down his scaled face. Around him, other Vehlari wept openly. They had been saved, but the cost had been terrible. 5.7 billion Vehlari had been evacuated. An entire civilization preserved. But humanity had paid for that preservation with 60% of their military fleet. Over 70,000 human lives lost. Admiral Marcus Chen dead, along with everyone who had served under him. "What have we done?" Kellan whispered. "What have they done for us?" An older Vehlari, one of the council members, placed a hand on Kellan's shoulder. "They kept a promise, young scholar. They showed us what honor truly means." The news of humanity's sacrifice spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Every species that had watched the battle, every civilization that had monitored the swarm's advance, learned what the humans had done. The initial reaction was shock. Then, disbelief. Then, something that the galaxy hadn't felt in a very long time. Shame. The Galactic Congregation held an emergency session. For the first time in recorded history, every single species attended. There was no debate, no argument, no political maneuvering. There was only a stunned silence as they watched the recording of the battle. They saw the human fleet arrive at Valar Prime. They saw the desperate two-week battle. They saw Admiral Chen's final charge into the heart of the swarm, and they understood that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The Kralthian ambassador, who had called humanity insane just weeks before, stood to speak. His forearms trembled. "We abandoned the Vaylari to die," he said quietly. "We calculated the cost and decided it was too high. We chose our own survival over theirs. But humanity chose differently. They chose honor over survival. They chose to keep a promise that was over 2 centuries old. And they won. Lo. Likes. Losing too." He paused, his voice growing stronger. "The swarm is broken. For the first time since they entered our galaxy, They've been stopped. And we did nothing. Humanity did everything. They showed us that the swarm can be beaten. They showed us how to fight back. And they died, giving us that knowledge. The Kralthian bowed his head. Humanity saved not just the Velari, but all of us. Because now we know the swarm can be defeated. They Rezi. By one, other ambassadors stood to speak. Each one confessed their shame. Each one praised humanity's sacrifice. And each one made a vow. Never again, the Mexari ambassador said. Never again will we stand by while a species faces extinction. Humanity has shown us the price of cowardice. We will not forget. The Galactic Congregation voted unanimously to mobilize every military asset available. For the first time in galactic history, all 47 species agreed to create a unified fleet. They would finish what humanity started. They would drive the Vike swarm back beyond the galactic rim and make sure it never returned. And they would do it in humanity's name. But humanity's sacrifice had cost them dearly. Earth was now virtually defenseless. The few ships that remained were barely enough to patrol their own system, let alone protect their colonies. If any hostile species had wanted to attack humanity, this would have been the perfect moment. But something extraordinary happened instead. The Kralthian fleet, the same species that had refused to help the Velari, redirected 20 warships to Earth to guard our allies while they recover. The Kralthian admiral said simply. The Mexari sent food and medical supplies to every human colony. The Tolvians sent engineers to help rebuild human infrastructure. The Hektar, who had lost their own fleet fighting the swarm, sent what few ships they had left to patrol human space. Every species that had stood by during the battle now rushed to help humanity recover from their sacrifice. On Earth, the reaction to the fleet's destruction was complicated. There was grief for the lives lost, pride in what they had accomplished, and fear about their now vulnerable position. But mostly, there was satisfaction. The promise had been kept. The debt had been repaid. A massive memorial was built in orbit around Earth. It consisted of 230 pillars of light, one for each ship that had fought at Valar Prime. At the center was a larger pillar, inscribed with the names of every human who had died in the battle. Admiral Marcus Chen's name was at the top, along with a quote from his final transmission. This is what honor looks like. This is what it means to be human. The Velari response was even more profound. High Scholar Kellan returned to what remained of Valar Prime. The world was scarred and damaged from the swarm's brief presence, but it was still habitable. He stood in the ruins and made a decision. We will rebuild here, he announced to his people. And we will dedicate our entire civilization to a new purpose. We will record and teach humanity's story. We will make sure the galaxy never forgets what they did. This is our new debt, and we will spend the next 1,000 years repaying it. The Velari established the Institute of Human Studies on Valar Prime. Every Velari child would learn about Captain Sarah Chen and Admiral Marcus Chen. They would learn about the 257-year promise. They would learn what it meant to keep faith even when the cost seemed impossible. A new term entered galactic vocabulary. Human debt. It meant a promise that would be kept no matter what. When a species wanted to emphasize their absolute commitment to something, they would say, I swear, a human debt. It became the highest form of promise in galactic society. The unified galactic fleet drove the Vix swarm back to the rim and beyond. The campaign took 3 years and cost millions more lives, but it succeeded. The swarm was defeated, its bioships destroyed, its threat ended, and at every major battle, the unified fleet flew human flags alongside their own. They fought in humanity's name, honoring the species that had shown them how to be brave. 50 years after the Battle of Valar Prime, the Galactic Congregation built a memorial at the battle site. It was a massive structure, visible from the surface of Valar Prime, made of a material that would last millions of years. The inscription was written in every galactic language. Here, humanity kept a promise 257 years old. Here, 70,000 humans gave their lives to save a civilization that was not their own. Here, the galaxy learned what honor truly means. May we never forget. May we always strive to be worthy of their example. On Earth, a child was born to a family descended from the Chen line. Her parents named her Sarah Chen Tikar, honoring both the captain who made the promise and the elder who inspired it. As Sarah grew, she learned her family's history. She learned about the debt and the sacrifice, and she made her own promise to live a life worthy of those who came before. The Vellery vigil continued, but now it ran in both directions. Humans monitored the Vellery civilization, and the Vellery monitored humanity, two species bound together by debt and sacrifice, watching over each other across the stars. In classrooms across the galaxy, teachers of every species told the story of humanity's promise. They taught their children that civilization wasn't about technology or power or wealth. It was about keeping faith with each other, about honoring debts, about being willing to sacrifice for others. Remember the humans, they would say. Remember what they did when the Vellery needed them. That is the standard we must all strive to meet. And in the quiet moments, in the dark spaces between the stars, when species faced difficult choices about honor versus survival, about promises versus pragmatism, they would ask themselves one question: what would humanity do? The answer was always the same. Humanity would keep the promise, no matter the cost, no matter the odds, no matter how long it took, because that was what it meant to be human. High scholar Kellan, now ancient and respected across the galaxy, gave his final lecture at the Institute of Human Studies when he was 300 years old. Thousands of students, from dozens of species attended. I knew Elder Takar, Kellan said, his voice weak but clear. I was there when Captain Chen made her promise. Takar didn't believe her. He thought it was just words, the kind of emotional statement young species make and then forget. He paused, letting silence fill the hall. But humanity didn't forget. They remembered for 257 years. They prepared. They planned. They waited. And when the moment came, they acted without hesitation. They showed us that promises matter, that debts must be repaid, that honor is not just a word, but a way of life. Kellan's amber eyes swept across the audience. The galaxy has etched their deeds in memory, eternal, not because we were ordered to remember, not because it serves our interests, but because we saw something so beautiful, so pure, so fundamentally right, that we cannot bear to let it be forgotten. He raised his scaled hand in a gesture of blessing. Go forth and be worthy of humanity's example. Keep your promises. Honor your debts. Stand for what is right, even when the cost is terrible. This is the lesson the humans died to teach us. Let us never forget. When Kellan died peacefully in his sleep that night, the entire galaxy mourned. And they remembered why they mourned. Because a young species had once made an impossible promise, and an old species had lived to see it fulfilled. The debt was repaid, the promise was kept, and the galaxy would never be the same.